What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and we are joined once again, but for the first time in a long time, by BVE, Billy Von Eltz, Billy himself. Billy, how's it going? It's been a while.
Going well, man. Happy 2021. Glad to be back.
Cool. So, the idea behind this video, obviously the Egoat rankings will make an appearance, but I wanted to kind of pick Billy's mind about League of Legends DFS because most of you know Billy is like a huge DFS player and was a DFS player before like League of Legends was on his radar. So I just was curious what kinds of things were easy to learn, what was difficult to learn, and now that he has a year of League of Legends DFS under his belt, to kind of pick his brain to see what other kinds of insights he has. And then later on in the video, we're going to get into the playoff matchups that are left and talk about who we expect to win the various championships around the world. So, Billy, anything off the top of the dome that you either think has changed over the past year for League of Legends DFS, or like insights you think are important to share with the viewers?
Yeah. So, and I guess it sort of ties one sort of, I guess, thing I learned into something that may be evolving a little bit. And so would be lineup construction. I think it's super important in League in particular with the captain slot to sort of, and I think also with only 7 roster spots overall, you have much more limited, typically 4 to 6 game slates, even 2 game slates a lot of the time. Just a lot of much fewer lineup options than you have in other sports. And I think you can find a lot of trends in terms of who you're putting at the captain spot, the amount of, and the amount of salary you're spending on different positions really comes into play. It's something that, when I coming into League with a DFS background, particularly I sort of initially played it like I would a basketball slate where I was just taking my max projected guy, and from a captain standpoint, you find that whoever's projected for whatever X, their salary at the highest point, and plug that guy into the captain slot. In my first few slates, I was playing a lot of support at captain and mostly team at captain because that was just the way it worked out. Those were not profitable slates. Quickly learned, to sort of be looking to the guys that could really pop off, ADCs, mids, and even your junglers when the price point hits, which I think is sort of the segue is I think DK, I don't know if they've totally figured out the best way to price League of Legends at this point. I think they've sort of in some ways boxed themselves in by being so formulaic in what they do. And sort of the way that, particularly on smaller slates, things are priced. You've seen them loosen up a little bit over the last couple nights, where you've been able on some of these 2 game slates to get the mid from have a full favorite stack with the mid at captain, which I think is partially just you have better teams playing each other and that you don't have such huge favorites where they're trying to sort of incentivize ownership. But I think over the course of this slate, seen a lot more top at captain be viable, particularly in LEC and LCS. I honestly don't know if it doesn't seem to be pricing driven. It seems maybe just to be meta driven and sort of just having some really huge pop off games from these carry tops. But that's something where I definitely lost out a little bit. I really won't play a lot of top at captain in at least especially earlier in the split. But I think that's something that's a lot more viable now. Maybe not on these 5 game slates, but even there we saw the slate that Rogue was on. Odo take down the Titans Fury.
Yeah, Odo Omne's won a slate recently. The Shy's won a slate recently. Nagari's won a slate recently, and it's interesting because like in regards to the meta, like the way that a top captain would get there back in like last season would have been like, okay, Zoom had a 20 assist performance and also had like 4 or 5 kills randomly and was the biggest favorite on the slate. So like their team stack cost so much money that it kind of needed to be a top captain or a support captain. So like, and that's more about like the fact that you're trying to stack favorites with favorites, like what you're saying. Now they're kind of letting you do mid laner captains with all favorites because it's just so disproportionate. Like the number of 80 carry captain teams versus everything else is kind of insane. And even jungle, I think jungle probably jumped mid at one point, just because people would rather have two favorites in their lineup together, even if it meant junglers. But then it was like, oh well, even though it was two junglers, like you were stacking them with an underdog, and somehow they'd both hit really hard. And I think a lot of that is really meta driven. So the other thing would be like with top lane, teams are like so things kind of change as time goes on with how teams approach drafting. So in the beginning of season, people would just do like the Gnar Renekton matchup and not really think about it. But a lot of teams now, since they're getting closer to like games that really matter, they're more willing to pick something like Jason into it. They're more willing to pick Quinn into it, like Lucian, Gangplank, a lot of these other champions where you do actually have a much higher kill upside that'll happen more often. So it's really cool how that happens, and it's kind of frustrating, I guess, at the same time, because next season we'll fall into the same situation where teams just get away from that because they want to play the more generic style of League of Legends. But let's talk about the different regions, and before we talk about the regions, let's talk about Egoat ranking. So can you give us a refresher on the Egoat ranking? And when's the last time you updated or posted about it? It was like last week, right?
I posted
On the 4th.
Yeah,
So like 3 days ago.
a couple days ago. Then, so it doesn't have the more recent LPL games, but I think really I actually haven't updated it even in my own spreadsheet here for the matches last night, which would probably be the biggest change of all. Although Egoat wise, FPX was a little closer to RNG than I had them in some of my other stuff here, but. Yeah, so the Egoat ranking is it's evolved a little bit, but was something I first started tinkering with probably in the playoffs last spring, and it takes on a individual player basis. Your sort of baseline is the amount of gold that the opposing player at that player's position gets in a game. So, for example, if you're talking about the Egoat ranking for Invictus Gaming, the top laner for the opponent of IG, his baseline is however much gold per minute the Shy either outscores or gets outscored by. And then your sort of value for that game is how, do you do better against the Shy than the average player, or do you do worse against the Shy than the average player in the sole metric of gold per minute. Mm-hmm. The reason I went with gold, which I've talked about a little before, is it just seemed intuitive at the time. 95+% of games, the team with the most gold wins. Gold, and it's sort of input and output, right? Because getting gold also allows you to snowball. And so it was also accessible in terms of just an easy data scrape from Leaguepedia. Mm-hmm. So as I've tinkered with it over time, the other thing that I really like about it is the simplicity. I've tried to put additional bells and whistles on it, play with different sort of weightings of more recent games and stuff. But really, at the end of the day, especially for the 1 league games, for the 3 game match leagues, you sometimes get into some situations where you want to sort of start excluding data from earlier in the split. But for the most part, you just sort of take the split numbers, throw them in, and there's no weighting needed. There's sort of, it's the right time period, I guess, what I'm trying to say. And I got totally off topic there. So you take the individual players for each game, you add up how well they're plus or minus over their opponent's average for the full slate, add them together, and that's the team's Egoat ranking. So what all that convoluted nonsense really is meant to say is that the number that it spits out is, in theory, if the team played an average team in their league, how much gold would they have more or less than that team in an average length match? Mm-hmm. So if a team has an Egoat ranking of 4,000, that would mean if the other team finished the game with 40,000 gold, you would expect them to have 44,000.
Yeah. And the one thing that you released at the end of February that I thought was really interesting was the Egoat differential between teams, and then you compared that to the implied win rating from Vegas money lines. So you had your Vegas money lines, your win projection model, and then the Egoat ranking plus or minus differential, and your win percentage against your Egoat win percentage, basically. And that was really the coolest part about it, because you you were weighted around 67%. So since that point, has it been roughly the same? Like, does Egoat still perform like at 60% or higher?
Yeah. It's so the Vegas has caught up to it a little bit. But so over the last, so combining, is it summer 2020 split plus spring 2021 split? Doesn't include the Worlds matches because there's sort of some cross league adjustments that I just excluded for this purpose. But 66% of games it's won. If you only include, and that's 1,239 games. If you exclude games where the differential is 2.5 or less, it only goes up to 67%. That gap was bigger before. But so 2/3 of games. Vegas over the same time is 68%, or I'm sorry, 67.4. And then my other model that I've talked about from time to time is 66.5.
Okay. Yeah, so that's really good. I think most people watching this video understand that that's really good. Are there any other, before we get into like the actual matchups and stuff like that, are there any other takeaways you have from Egoat, like areas where you think Egoat does really well and then spots where maybe it like underperforms what you'd expect?
I think that, and so I'll post that again after we get off here, the chart you're talking about. But I think that it really shows sort of some stratifications in terms of, maybe not, sort of lines of demarcation, but some rough areas where there's a jump, right, in terms of the probability of what the number means. And so, I don't think it's sort of linear. It's if the ego difference between teams is 10%ish, it's close to a coin flip most of the time. If once you get to sort of 10 to 30%, then I think you're talking in that sort of baseline 2/3 type rate. When you get up high, and I think that's really where it outperforms Vegas in sort of that 10 to maybe like 40% range.
Yeah.
When you get up higher, just the model I think sort of has more uncertainty in it. I don't know really why even, but sort of at the highest tier, Egoat's maybe 85% accurate, whereas Vegas is closer to 90-95% accurate. So where I distrust Egoat or sort of discount it is when Vegas is saying, it's a -1,000 favorite and Egoat says the underdog has a chance. I'm not going to go all in, but I might sort of take just sort of maybe give the dog a little bit extra juice.
And how much different is your win projection model from Egoat? Like, does your win projection model take Egoat into consideration? Because your projection model was slightly by Egoat, but it's still so really close.
That's caught up as well, and where the model really underperforms, it's so weird. If the model spits out sort of a percentage projection win, and the reason that the nice thing about Egoat, right, is it's matchup agnostic. For the model that I use, I need both teams that are playing each other. That's sort of the main difference. Mm-hmm. At the lowest tier, which is like maybe 10% of the games, it's won, and it's 53% win percentage or less. It's won 43% of games. Mm-hmm. When you get above that, just the next sort of 3%, so 53 to 56, it jumps to 65%. So the overall win percentage for the projection model is basically the same as Egoat, but it's about 3% higher if you exclude that bottom tier, which again is just something I take into account, right? If Egoat says a team's going to win and the model likes the other team, but it's only by a little bit, I'll trust Egoat more.
Okay, sure. So that makes sense. The last thing, I guess, before we get into...
Oh, and I'm sorry, goal differential is a factor there, but it's sort of relative to each other, relative to the matchup versus relative to average.
Yeah. Okay, and then there was one other thing that happened on Twitter today where one of the casters from the LPL was talking about like the RNG FPX matchup, and it's really funny to me because
which caster?
Munchables.
Okay.
So it's like
last year I watched as we've talked about, an exceeding amount of LPL for someone who's on the East Coast.
Yeah, same. But... Yeah, scary amount. But it's like and before I get into what he said, I think that we would both agree, like in general, like casters and like color analysts and like those kinds of guys that are on broadcasts, their jobs are not to predict what's going to happen in a game unless you're Tony Romo. If you're Tony Romo, then yeah, you're trying to call plays and stuff like that. But for the most part, they're trying to hype up the matchup. They're trying to give in to the storylines that are surrounding the match. They're trying to just pump fuel onto the fire and just make it a more enjoyable viewing experience, like going crazy on the cast and stuff like that, and talking about, you know, the ways that teams can get back into a match, even though they're, like, for the most part, done. So for someone like that, I would expect him to have this kind of take, which in my opinion is an incorrect take. And this is exactly why sportsbooks are the way that they are and are beatable, is because guys like this think that they're a knowledge expert about, like, betting and stuff somehow too, even though they have no idea what's going on in the betting world. I'm assuming. Maybe he's a bettor too, but I doubt it, because he'd probably get in a lot of trouble. But basically, someone said that FPX beating RNG last night was not, like, a true upset. Like, just because, you know, they're relatively close teams. FPX has a great pedigree. They're a very talented team. They went through a roster change, but overall, like, it was just the jungle position switching a few times, and they're still a very good team. So that was basically the argument that this person was making in their tweet. And then Munchable said, I wholeheartedly disagree. RNG were first seed, which should not matter. And FPX without Bo, who was the jungler who was, like, banned for match fixing or something.
Is that what happened to Bo?
Yeah, and he said, was that Beishuan? It was one of them. One of the FPX junglers was banned because he was match fixing while he was in the developmental league.
Okay, Bo didn't lose, right, when he was at the top tier.
I don't think Beishuan.
Like Bo dominated the Egoat rankings more than anyone's ever dominated them.
Yeah.
The peak was Blabber at the beginning of last year, but Bo just knocked it out of the park.
They both played pretty well. And then that's the other thing is, like, obviously, like, when a player performs like that and the numbers look good, obviously people are going to want to give him a lot of credit. Literally impossible to do on a bad team. Like, if you took somebody like Haro, I think if you took Haro and put Haro onto FPX, they'd still be pretty good. Maybe not as good, but, like, just being a part of FPX, having Nogri in the top lane, having Duanbe in the mid lane, fundamentally changes how you're allowed to play the game. It's just crazy how big of an impact, like, how your team's talent level will increase your own talent level or decrease, or at least the perception of your talent level. So far, Munchable said RNG were first seed, as if that means anything. That's basically just saying, well, they won more before, so they're going to win more in the future. That he said FPX without Bo probably wouldn't have even made the playoffs. That's kind of crazy to me. Bo, during that stretch of the season, obviously played really well. And, like, yes, they won the matches with Bo in it, and Bo carried, but it's just kind of a weird statement to make. And then he said, this is a resurgence of FPX and a huge upset to win 3-0. So, like, it was very unlikely that they won the match 3-0. But it's not more of an upset because they won 3-0. So he said, and then the last thing he said was, by claiming FPX should have won, you remove the prestige of what they did today. And, like, there were a bunch of people from, like, DFS Twitter, like, liking it and commenting on it, and one of the people from my Discord did as well, and he was basically like, what is this guy talking about? Like, everybody, well, not everybody, but most people who were serious about watching League of Legends and, like, betting League of Legends, willing to risk their money on League of Legends, knew going into that match that FPX was, like, an extremely live dog and had a real chance to win. And then you had people like Gelati, myself, and John from the esports department. We all liked FPX more going into the match. And that's the kind of thing that you would never hear from a caster like Munchables. So what did Egoat rankings think about that match last night? Because obviously, since it's more based on gold and RNG had a better record, I would assume that RNG was the team that Egoat was on, which is reasonable because it's also the favorite.
It was, but it was there was a 9.5% difference in their Egoat rankings, and by, contrast, and so the TES is 30% above EDG in the matchup tonight.
Oh wow!
So it was TES is right now as the top team in LPL at 100%. RNG was at 89% going into last night, and FPX was third at 79%. But to your point, right, it was the third best team by the Egoat rankings against the second best team.
Yeah.
FPX has climbed. I think they were fourth coming in and jumped JDG after they beat them, but they were at the top of the Egoat rankings for a little while. They fell off. If Bo was the jungler in the lineups that I have right now, they would be the best team in FPX or in the LPL.
Mm-hmm.
John is just a little bit lower just because, to your point, I think he probably wasn't in the better matchups for the jungler that they played and just sort of didn't get the, he might have had those similar numbers to what Bo had, and they would increase their ranking now if he was the jungler for those games.
Yeah. And then just looking at the gold threshold, just a note you might want to make and like take a look at would be like in matches that are within like 2,000 average expected gold, like where would that fall? That would be, what percentage would that be? Because like basically the way that I look at League of Legends is whichever team gets a 2,000 gold lead in the game first should win the match. Unless they have a team composition that doesn't scale well or just completely get outplayed. So like that could be a way to think to yourself, like if FPX, the last number that I had was 3,088. So if FPX is at 3,088 and RNG is at 41,000, then there's like a 1,000 gold differential. So you could ask yourself, like, if FPX is down 1,000 gold going into like the most important team fight of the match, do you think they have a realistic chance of winning that fight, like that one individual team fight? Or it's like, yeah, I mean, that's basically it. Because then, as long as you're within 2,000 gold, if you trust in a team's ability to draft, like how they will draft, or if you believe in their ability to team fight while losing, or like to make some kind of macro outplay, that 2,000 differential is like extremely important.
Agreed. Or makes sense. So an average length game across all four major regions is, just calculating it like 32.18.
Yeah, 32, 33, yeah.
And the average gold per minute per team, which is interesting to your 2,000 point, is 1,785. So it's sort of 1 minute worth of gold, right? Or a little more than that, which right, it's one team fight. You can sort of turn that around quickly, especially if you get a buff or something. So putting those two together, average gold per game per team is 57.4, which would make 2,000 around 3%. So it would be the lowest tier. And so I guess Egoat is almost a little bit more sensitive than that. Right? It sort of says a coin flip is anything maybe 3,000 gold, because it gets up to about 5% where you really start to see an uptick in win percentage.
Okay, so that, I think that would be something that we could take a look at a different time. But let's get into the remaining matches, and we can go to the different regions, and maybe I'll take some first and tell you my thoughts on the matchup before I know what Egoat's saying, and vice versa. So, which region do you want to start off in? What's your favorite region?
I like the LPL, man. Give me let's go to China.
All right, so we have the match tomorrow, EDG against TES, which we already kind of talked about slightly. And since FPX beat RNG went to the losers bracket, and FPX is still in the winners bracket. And I love their change that they made to the playoffs. They have this double elimination style once they get to the final four. That's a really interesting idea, because it allows more teams to get in to the playoffs, but not every team is treated the same. My favorite all-time playoff format is the actual gauntlet from Korea, where
I was going to say, yeah,
that's
LCK
just so cool. That's so cool. The fact that you can have this team just come out of nowhere and theoretically win the whole thing, that's really what the playoffs should be about.
Yeah, and it also doesn't detract, right? The NBA, you hear these proposals put every team in the NBA playoffs, but I love the ideas where it's you get some buys, and then you get to the higher seed gets to pick their opponent. I love that stuff, but because you still get the reward in the LCK system for getting the one seed, right? You get to skip to the end of the line.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's so funny. Last spring when T1, it was T1 against Gen G in the finals, and it's okay, well, T1's been destroying people recently, and Gen G is a team that they've historically done well against. So even though they got all the way to the finals and like were just not gifted because like they earned it, but like even though they started in the finals, I was so confident that they are just like dead in the water because T1 is just a different beast when it comes to T1 against Gen G, which was crazy that Gen G beat them earlier this year. I was all over T1. But for EDG and Top Esports, what are you thinking here? Give me your rundown.
Yeah, I think it's the Egoat loves Top Esports. My model is a little bit closer, has Top Esports at a 59% win clip. So I'm pretty confident in TES. I was probably a little overweight on RNG compared to the field, but generally over on last night's game. So I was basically even with FPX too. So, but you know, between tonight's game, definitely prefer TES.
Okay, and what's the percent differential?
30.
30%. And you win. And so, what do you win at that? What
So
clip do you win at?
Yeah, that comes out to. It's a little bit of an aberration. So it's like somewhere between 70 and 75%.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting to me, and I think that it's funny because if you try to apply all the Munchables logic that he would have used in the matchup from last night, a lot of that still applies to this matchup. And it's like, okay, well, EDG won more during the regular season, but it was 13 and 3 to 12 and 4. EDG won 78% of their games all season. Top Esports only won 71% of their games all season. And Top Esports did have some bad performances where like they just completely were shown up by like teams that they should have beaten. Like I think Rogue Warriors beat Top Esports at one point. Suning beat them in week 1. I'm pretty sure Rogue Warriors beat them in week 2. So they had these two horrible performances in the beginning of the split, and then they kind of just took off from there. So I'll just do a lane by lane real quick.
But I keep in my numbers, I only keep the aggregate like games record, not the sort of match record. And it's sort of telling, right? Like 24-9 for 25-10 for Top Esports compared to 28-8 for EDG. It's like, I mean, I guess 12-4, 13-3, but I mean, like FPX is, you know, it's just I don't know, it doesn't seem that different when you look at the sort of cumulative numbers to me.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the other thing is like and one of the original concerns I had about the Egoat ranking was like the blowout games where it's like, okay, well, this team won by 10,000 gold in 19 minutes, like that's going to make things go kind of crazy. And I know that it's since you weigh everything correctly and like it can only throw off so much of a percentage of a team's Egoat ranking, which is obviously why it's like a good metric and successful and everything. But it's like,
I think we talked about it a little bit last year, even where like it definitely rewards teams who play that sort of snowball style and hurts teams that sort of play it or it rewards teams that play it well and really punishes teams that play it poorly.
Yeah.
DBG just it loves it, right? Because they come in, they're just sort of they've got the same pattern almost every game where they're winning games in 25 minutes and just sort of killing people, or they'll get sort of bled out over time if it doesn't work. Yeah. And so either way, even if they have good losses and bad wins, you compare that to a team like Rogue Warriors where they have sort of bad wins and sort of crushed losses. So it's, or even this year, just no wins and crushed losses.
Yeah. So basically, like if I'm looking at it lane by lane, Flandre coming into the split, a lot of people were kind of like on the fence about Flandre. Could he still be a good player? I was one of those people as well, but he's had a good split and he's been a good player for a long time, so it's not that shocking. And especially compared to their top laner from last year. Jai doesn't have to split time with Junjia anymore. Jai had a good split overall, but is not the focal point of the team. Oh my god. I can't even say anything like nice about him. So Jai against Karsa. Karsa obviously, again, coming off of last year, had a really underperformed all of last year. Even though their numbers looked good, it wasn't anything close to like how good Karsa is expected to be because of the type of champions that were being played in the meta, and like his real champion pool didn't pair up really nicely against Graves and stuff like that. So it took until the summer for him to really come into his Like it was until the summer where he started playing Graves, and that's really when they figured out the meta. Started playing really well in the summer, did a good job at the World Championships, and then ended up losing to Sunning. Again, due in large part to like their overreaction to the meta. So they went from a team that was like picking Lee Sin into Graves as much as they could, and then it went to like, okay, we're just gonna play Graves in Italy as much as we can. And then they ran into Sunning. Sunning is playing weird champions with like weird build paths to specifically counter Graves. So it's like Top Esports reacted to the meta, became the meta, and then were beaten by the counter meta, which doesn't really happen that often, especially for a team as talented as them. The best part about this matchup, which is kind of like the most generic way to look at it because people just love AD carries and mid laners in general, but Knight against Scout. Scout is probably one of the most underappreciated mid laners in the LPL because he hasn't been on a team that's performed very well for the past couple of years, but now EDG is playing to their peak, and Scout is a gigantic part of that. And this is kind of the talent that everyone knew that Scout had his entire career, just didn't have the rest of the pieces around him for the most part. And then Viper coming over from Korea. Everybody loved Viper when he was on Griffin, just destroying everyone. And then I lost a bunch of money on him, thinking that Hanwha Life could actually do something with him, but that didn't work out. Going up against Knight and Jackie Love. So Knight obviously thought of as one of the best mid laners in the world still. People like don't talk about him at all anymore, which is kind of funny because that's all people wanted to talk about last year. And then Jackie Love, who people like way too much, in my opinion. Like, very good player. Top Esports could definitely win a world championship with him, but he just doesn't have the play style. He doesn't have a play style that I think is impossible for other people to play. Like, when Jackie Love is on Senna and winning the game, it's like, yeah, he's playing Senna. That's what Senna's supposed to do. So he doesn't outperform my expectations of an AD carry on a winning team.
So I have I'm playing a little around with some individual player metrics, and I have one that I posted a little bit about around the start of March Madness that combines, sort of takes a normalized kill death ratio, gold per minute, CS per minute, and the percentage of a team's kill and assist fantasy points that a player gets. So it's a little bit DFS focused, but also sort of pulls in some general metrics. And Knight is just off the charts, 38% above average, which might be the highest number, certainly near the highest.
Was that your 4-factor stuff?
What's that?
Was that your 4-factor stuff?
Yeah, this is the 4-factor stuff. Scout and Viper both Scout 26% above and Viper 23% above average, but Jackie Love is only about 6% above average. So, pretty close. But I think sort of underscores what you've been saying from a numerical standpoint too.
Yeah. And then supports, I mean, it's really difficult to make a gigantic difference as a support, like outside of what the rest of your team is doing. Mako is a very good player, has been around for a long time. Zhuo, we haven't seen the best of Zhuo just as a young player. We don't have as many games to know what they're kind of going through. I'm all in on Top Esports tonight. In their matchup against Sunning, like, I'm a huge Sunning supporter, and I was like, I can't go against Top Esports in this spot. It's just not something I can do in good faith. And then everybody in my Discord was like, what do you mean? Like, Sunning is our team. Like, how could we go against them now? So I'm on Top Esports. I just completely agree with that one. So then if we're right and we have EDG going up against RNG, who would you have then?
EDG. There, I favor. So my model favors RNG slightly, and Egoat favors ENG or RNG pretty substantially. So about 52% win rate, but that is that trouble zone for the model.
And that's where we should be. And that's where we should be in a lot of these matchups at like the end of the playoffs and stuff like that. Like, this is really
absolutely.
Yeah.
But and so the ego is also a little bit more. I guess there's a few games at the beginning of the slate that it doesn't include as well, which might sort of change things. Or no, that's not true. Actually, I forget I said that. I switched how that worked this year.
Oh, because of the look back period.
What's that?
Because of the look back period.
Yes, I switched outward for the model. So that distinction is no longer needed. But so that the ego is 20% higher for RNG, which works out to about 65% win rate.
Okay, well that's pretty good. RNG did beat RNG beat EDG when they matched up against each other uh, earlier this year, and I'm trying to find what week that was, because that was a really good match, and I was pretty hyped up because they were both like really close to the top of the table already. So let me see if I could find it real quick. Um, but then, so also you should tell us top
Week 7,
esports
Saturday and week 7.
Saturday week 7, and that was a 2-1 win. So Saturday week 7. So what do you have for the other potential matchup if it was top esports against FPX?
It would be so yeah. So Top Esports is a heavy favorite. 71% in the model and 20% in Egoat, which again works out to about 65%. Which is just it's frustrating because as I said, I think the first match I watched last year was Fun Plus Phoenix, and Doomby had a hilarious interview afterwards. So I've been a fan ever since.
The guy's awesome.
And so I feel like all my numbers have been underselling FPX right before they keep making their charges. They've been like a week behind on them. So hopefully that's a good sign and they'll pull it out. But the numbers say Top Esports.
Yeah. So I was just looking through the scoreboards from the RNG FPX match or RNG EDG match, and in the first game, Xiaohu dominated Flandre by counterpicking Tristana into Gnar, which is obviously really smart. Second game, he just went like he didn't go for a counter matchup. It was Gragas against Jace. It was 11-8, and I think that's just stylistically from EDG. That's not very surprising. Like RNG is the more DFS friendly team just in general, so I'm not really surprised that the rankings like RNG better that way either. And then in the third game, Xiaohu won lane, but like didn't carry the game. It was actually Cryan, which isn't expected because like they really have been like a top focused team that like builds the lead that way, and then transitions into team fighting, letting Gala try to carry the match. And I like before the season started, when I was talking about RNG, I was pretty high on RNG, talking about their higher ceiling cases because Xiaohu, being an extremely skilled player, supposed to be one of the best players in the world a few years ago, making that transition is not as difficult because of his expansive champion pool and the ability to like be potentially more talented than the people that he's playing against, because mid lane is really the type of role that people get attracted to because the team will play around them. And that's exactly who Xiaohu was, but wasn't being played around because they had Uzi, who I think Uzi was before your time, but you probably know who he is anyways.
Yeah.
So that's very cool for RNG. I think this also speaks to like stylistically, since RNG is the more bloody team, the more volatile team, and has advantages in multiple lanes, they're more likely to carve out a gold lead in a game. So like I would expect them to be the team that has a 1 to 2,000 gold lead, and then you need to ask yourself, is EDG good enough at team fighting to keep it close? And I think that EDG is, and then on the other hand, it's like if EDG is winning by 1 or 2,000 gold, is RNG able to like make that comeback? I think they're able to make the comeback, but they're also so much more volatile. I would expect their early game deficits to be bigger because they continuously try to make plays, similar to what Suning did in that top esports match where they died like a million times in like in a 20-minute game. That's how I see RNG. So I think that we agree though overall. I think that RNG is the side that I would prefer over EDG, and I think that I do prefer top esports over FPX. But that's a spot where like I hope that I'm wrong, because I would love FPX to just like win. That'd be really cool to watch, because they were so like middling last year. It was really frustrating to watch. But that's basically it for the LPL. So if you had to bet on it, look into the future and bet on who you think ends up winning the spring playoffs, you basically think it's going to be top esports, right? With the Egoat ranking.
Yeah. And I think sort of they win out, anytime I plug in against pretty much any other matchup into the model as well. So that'd be where my money goes.
Yeah. So I think that
the other thing I'll add on RNG, just sort of I think a neat little, do what you will with it. But if I'm not mistaken, I think Gala averages the most fantasy points per loss of any player in the and basically across all 4 leagues. So in a 5 game match, so even if EDG is sort of a 2/3 dog or 3/4 dog, you still expect him to take a game. Nice little boost there too if he can get out kick a. He's one of the few players that scores more points than your game not played bonus. So nice little add on there.
Sure. And I guess in that theoretical slate, it would be Top Esports beating FPX and then RNG beating EDG. But like, if you think that, yeah, I guess it just makes Gala a better like secondary stack play, because even if that secondary stack loses, if you wanted to do like a 4-2-1 or a 4-1-2
Exactly.
where you incorporate a third team into it, yeah, okay, yeah, that is good information to have. So I think FPX I FPX is the big question mark, because I've been saying in my Discord for a while now, like, this is like a do and be situation where the meta is finally turning into something where do and be can play basically any champion that he wants. Rise was just buffed recently, and like that fundamentally changes how FPX can draft, because they already have like bigger champion on stage champion pools that they're willing to go into these matchups. And when you get these like split pushing champions or hyper scaling champions that do and be can actually get onto, like, it just makes it so much more difficult to draft against them and beat them, because there's always that backdoor cover where it's like, oh well, we didn't pay enough attention to do and be, and we didn't close out the game fast enough, and now he has like an 11 kill rise and he's just split pushing and we can't do anything about it. Like, that's just always a pretty bad spot to be in. So does that make me like them more than Top Esports? Not really, because Top Esports like still has the tempo advantage against them. I guess that's one thing we should probably talk about at some point too, is like tempo. Like, Egoat ranking loves tempo teams where like they're willing to take these risks and just like snowball out of control. So having, and I think that's right, because like if you take like a high tempo team from China and put them up against a high tempo team from like the LCS or the LEC, we would still expect the Chinese team to win, because like they play the same style, but one of them's better at playing the style than the other.
Agreed. And I've sort of, for cross league matchups, I've basically used international play games and sort of use that to sort of set what your sort of average team from a region is, and then sort of scale off of that, right? So if your average LPL team that makes Worlds is 10% better than your average LEC team that makes Worlds, but you have a team making Worlds that's 10% below in one and 10% above in the other, you'd expect them to match up, right? So I think like that's all sort of hypothetical, but it makes sense to have like maybe the fifth team in the LPL, if they play G2, pretty close, right? Who was our squad last year with Peanut? Like LGD last year in
yeah.
Worlds.
Yeah, because like looking at these, I guess another way to say what I just said would be like, if you take a top team from the LCK other than Damwon Gaming, you're probably going to get some kind of like non-tempo team. They're more focused on the macro game. Like if Gen.G is in an international competition, if Team Liquid from the LCS is in an international competition, they are not the same kind of like tempo teams. We're just going to try to push the snowball as far as we can, as fast as we can. They like I don't like them as much as a team like Mad Lions, G2, Top Esports, like these hyper aggressive, build these gigantic leads, have these ridiculous kill scores, like Damwon Gaming, same thing.
And it's weird because Team Liquid is the one exception in my numbers where like I just keep waiting for them to fall. But even when they had, even when they were 5-5 and sort of just middling from a record standpoint, they've had strong performances, not consistently for sort of game to game, but they never go 5, 6, 7 games in a row where they're really poor. They'll always sort of crush somebody in there. You get one of those sort of crazy Jensen games or something. But so like even now, after when they lost to C9, they still stayed at the top of the LCS rankings. So they're sort of one exception to that, and I don't know why. Or I guess what I just said is my best sort of conjecture as to why. But otherwise, agree with that. And right, I think that the styles is, or I guess maybe I'd be interested in your take. Is that what's a more fragile style to? I feel like it's not, I feel like a more fragile style, right, is sort of relying on carrying, because then you're sort of just depending on skill and, or I don't know, you tell me, right?
Yeah,
Like, because I feel like if you're relying on a snowball style, you can always have in your back pocket like the do and be card, or other teams have their own sort of hyperscale guy who's, you just sort of get your ADC carry scaled up and let him farm all of the game and he can take over at the end.
yeah,
Um, Versus relying on sort of executing through the game every single time and not making a mistake that allows the other team to start snowballing. It
yeah,
just seems like that's much more fragile overall style.
yeah. So it's funny because I think that it's really just those two different types where it's like the team that will always look to fight you in the early game and go for actual kills. Like it looks like they're playing for kills instead of playing for objectives. So in the playing for kills category, I would put teams like G2, Mad Lions, Fnatic, Top Esports, C9, Damwon Gaming, and recently T1. Like they all kind of have that sort of playstyle where the priority is getting kills because getting that kill will give us a man advantage, will give us a power play to take something else. Then you have teams like Team Liquid where they're fine playing more of a predictable like timeline in the game where they're like, okay, around this time there will be a dragon fight. Around this time there will be a Rift Herald fight. Around this time there will be another dragon fight, and then another dragon fight, and then another dragon fight. And they're willing to opt into that kind of like flow of the game, like playing around these keystone moments. Whereas a team like G2 will constantly try to apply pressure in between those gaps. So I prefer the applying pressure consistently, looking for advantages all the entire game. It increases the number of interactions between the teams, which does increase the volatility, because if you mess up that play, then you're going to give up the advantage you already established. But it also allows you to increase that lead. It allows you to compound that lead. And it's not only gold. It's like part of it is gold, a part of it is vision, which allows you to maintain your objective control. So like in League of Legends, there's the material side of things, which I think gold would play into, and then there's a positional side of things where it's like, I already have a one tower advantage against you. I'm closer to getting that second tower than you are to getting that first tower, unless you do it very fast, because that's going to exacerbate the problem. The minion waves are going to get pushed up further, and then you're going to have to respond to that minion wave. And you're going to have less of a vision. You're going to have less vision control, so I'm allowed to encroach on your jungle, which potentially takes away jungle camps from the enemy team. It all just kind of compounds on itself if you're not like out there making trades, like handshaking stuff, which is what a lot of teams that don't trust themselves do. Like if you think that you're the better team, you should be contesting almost everything, and if you're going to be contesting almost everything, you need to be drafting accordingly.
Yeah, and when the interactions point that you made, it was exactly when it clicked, because like, as we talked about before, sort of I always draw on the other sports, but it's the old basketball principle where if you're the better team, you want to increase the number of possessions in the game because you're going to win more of those individual possessions. Yeah. And if you're a bad team, you want to slow the game down, limit the number of possessions, and hope that you can win.
Hold on for dear life.
Yeah,
hold on for dear life. Yeah, and that's and there's always teams. There are always teams that play that other style very well. So like there's always a chance in the NFL that you get a very good defensive team that kind of can just keep everything under control and slow things down, play through the running game, limit number of interactions. In League of Legends, it's a lot more difficult to do that because it's less of a structured game where it's really on the teams to create the interactions and force the issue. And in forcing the issue is more like throwing a deep ball, like throwing a 50-50, like 30 yards down the field, or like taking a ton of threes.
Even in those other sports, I think you do see the growing consensus that, or at least in my little world, is against those types of tactics, right? That like PFF always talks about how, yes, you can win on the back of a great defense, but it's so much harder for a great defense to show up week in, week out. It's just a much more fragile thing to do. Same thing with basketball. It was the big knock on UVA for all those years when they were just sort of holding teams to 55 a game. Yeah. It's like, yeah, that's great. But once all you need to do in a tournament is one team scores 70, and if you can't score more than 65, you lose. So it wasn't until they sort of got some scores like Brogdon and stuff in there that they were able to take that next step.
And that's another issue with League of Legends, because it's not just the players; it's the players plus the champion. Like you need to draft accordingly. You need to have that draft difference not be so extreme, because if you are the better team and you play an early game team composition that can snowball, like, yes, the onus is on you to be more aggressive and create those interactions, but you were going to do that anyways. So it looks it looks a lot better when you have Renekton as opposed to the other team having Renekton. That's the issue, is because like a lot of these, like if you defensively pick Renekton, where it's like they're going to try fighting us early, I need to react to that by having a Renekton that has a higher power level at the early part of the game. Like if you're not out there making those aggressive plays with the Renekton, then you're just not going to be as good, because you're not building a lead. You're trying to not give up a lead, and so that goal differential.
Those characteristics are inherent in the player, right?
Exactly. Because you can be like, that's why people get so pissed off when drafting goes sideways in League of Legends, because it's like, you have Xiaohu. Why are you putting Xiaohu on like a stupid tank champion 5 games in a row when he can't carry that way? Like, he needs to carry. Put him on a carry champion. And that's really where the frustration comes, I think, from a lot of people, because it's so obvious to some people out there, but it's just, that's not how a lot of coaches think. Because there are only so many good carry champions, and it's not easy to put your players into situations where they can win. Because it's like, okay, we're getting too far off of it, but I think that we are scratching the surface of like the next level of League of Legends. It'll be really interesting to see who is right, because like what side is going to be the 3-point shooting side? Is it going to be LS talking about scaling and all this kind of stuff, or is it going to be the other side who's saying, well, actually, you should be trying to get as many champions with like straight line progression throughout the game, where you can contest every single objective, increase the number of interactions between both teams, and just embrace that volatility, embrace the number of team fights, have better ganking champions and better engage options, all this kind of stuff. Which I think it might be that side, but there is a perfect world where you can draft because you want to have a ton of interactions, but itemize efficiently that allows you to scale as well. So it's a very complex issue. It's an issue that I love talking about. But let's wrap up the other series. I think that's how you say that.
Sirai.
Yeah, so we finished the LPL. Let's go to the LCK. So in the LCK, we are in the finals. We have Damwon Gaming against Gen G, and I think that the eye test and the Egoat rankings and everything else out there is just going to say the same thing, which is Damwon Gaming should destroy Gen G. So they're a minus 357 favorite. That's pretty big for a finals matchup. And then lane by lane, I'll just do that really quick, and then we'll get your thoughts on it. So Khan against Rascal. They've both had really good seasons. Khan is coming off of a down year on FPX because they didn't play around him. And like that's kind of what I was mentioning, is like even last year there were spurts where you put Khan onto somebody like, I think like he played Vladimir at an international competition once or twice and like did really well, was able to carry a match. Then Nogri this entire season, people were like, oh my god, Nogri isn't playing really well on FPX. It's because they're picking like tank champions and champions without a lot of agency. Then in this RNG match, they give him like counter matchups. He played Aurelia yesterday and he's dominating people again. And that's why it's like it's important to like have opinions of players' talents, but also their play style and what champions are they actually going to be put on. And then we have Canyon against Clid. I liked Clid a lot when he was on T1, but ever since he came to Gen G, like they've been playing a much slower style, and Clid is not able to shine as often. And Canyon has had a great year and a half, I guess, at this point. Showmaker, obviously one of the best mid laners in the world. BDD is also one of the best mid laners in the world. But again, because of Gen G's play style and their drafting style, is often put into some weird spots. And then we have Ghost and Beryl against Ruler and Life. Ghost has been asked to carry a lot more this season, which is good because they've been able to do it. But I still like Ruler more than Ghost. So if I had to rank the bot lane, it'd be Ruler, then Ghost and Beryl, and then Life. So I'm on the Damwon side. I think that this is going to be another test for the playstyle differences. It's like if Damwon like tries to slow things down, that's going to play into Gen G's hand. So we really want Damwon to be the more aggressive team and kind of forcing the issue, being the ones kind of pushing the tempo of the game. And then Genji will be more about trying to like match their like react to the early aggression, but ultimately outscale them with Ruler being on like a late game carry probably. But even in that scenario, I still like Damwon. It's just if Genji wins, I expect it to be lower scoring, lower kills in general. And if Damwon wins, they could play it slow, which just makes them win less often in my mind. Or they play like high variance League of Legends and just dominate.
The breakdown makes sense. So I guess Egoat gives DWG about a 65% win rate or chance of winning. My model's a little bit closer though, is 56% DWG. And there, I think because that's so the model also takes into account. I think the biggest difference are how well teams do against their opponent in terms of objectives, sort of how many dragons you're getting per game above or barons and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where you see a team like Genji maybe perform a little bit better because, or a team like Team Liquid is another one that, first of all, as they do an Egoat, do even better in this metric. Having, just sort of focusing control and being able to control. I think in the LPL, maybe you don't see it a little bit less because there's less of a stratification between the teams, but in like the LCK, LEC, where you sort of have your 4 or 5 top teams and then some sort of bottom teams where you can really clean up and sort of have some blowout wins, like, those sort of 8-0 wins that you see Genji get a lot can add up in terms of that metric.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like, if you look at like, it's not that the number of towers they get on average or the number of dragons they get on average is much higher. It's just that like when they're included into your model, it makes them look a lot better than when it's just like a pure gold statistic, which isn't really going to have as much. The dragon's not going to have as much of an influence on that. And it's interesting because a couple of years ago, I made a video about the gold value of each dragon. So like that could theoretically be something where like if you said Genji averages 1 dragon more than the enemy team every game, regardless of their opponent, or like if there's a differential between the two teams where it's like an actual full dragon or something like that, a dragon would probably be worth like between 250 to 500 gold, depending on what type of dragon it is. But if the team has like a full dragon advantage, then that would also increase the percentage of the time that they get Elder Dragon Soul, and Dragon Soul itself is worth like 1,000 per. The buff itself is worth 1,000. So if you get Dragon Soul, it's really worth like 5,000 gold, depending on which one it is. Like Infernal Dragon is one of the most one of the highest value dragons because of the amount of damage that it adds onto your team composition. Mountain Dragon, the same thing, because it makes your team so much tankier and resistant to damage. That's why people don't care as much about Cloud Soul, because it's increasing your movement speed. And even though movement speed has a gold value to it, it's much more difficult to use movement speed to create an advantage in League of Legends than like the regeneration from Motion Soul, the pure defensive stats from Mountain Dragon, or the offensive stats from Infernal Dragon. So those things, that's an interesting way to think of it as well. And then also with Baron, it's like when you hit that Baron spike, like if you have a considerable amount of Barons over the enemy that you're facing, then there will be a larger percentage of the time where you get Baron buff, have that Baron buff for the next team fight, or can use that Baron buff power play to like either erase a gold deficit or expand on a gold lead. So there are ways to
earlier point, your vision, you get down mid tower finally, and you can sort of things like that.
Yeah, there's a way to quantify it. It's just that it's not easily agreed to by most people in League of Legends because they just don't think of the game that way when they really should. It really simplifies things a lot.
Something this is a little bit off topic as well, but something I've been wondering. Are you aware of anyone that tracks over time either the sort of gold efficiency of items, and what I'm thinking of is sort of based on buffs or damage per second for champions, and sort of like the gold, like
the pot,
like Senna is X percent as powerful as she was at her peak on a damage per second basis.
People don't do the damage stuff as much because like you're by giving a champion levels and gold, you're increasing their stats. So like a fully built out Senna will be able to do more damage than like a level 18 Senna with 6 items.
Oh, sure.
But
I guess I'm thinking of like they buff her W or I guess it doesn't make sense to her W, but like they buff her Q, right? And so now all of a sudden she's doing more damage per second because of the Q buff.
Yeah.
And then like comparing that and saying like, right, because they'll talk about, right, they just in whatever 11.5 they nerfed Azir, but it's like, well, how much, right? Like, and so like, I'm wondering if anyone quantifies that.
Yeah, so one of the main guys from the LCS does sometimes like Freak, so he'll talk about the percentage differential between the old ability and the new ability, but nobody has created that baseline that I think you're getting to, where like it's more similar to like DPS meters from like World of Warcraft. So like I used to play World of Warcraft, and there were simple ways to measure how much damage you're doing, like in a raid or something, or to somebody in like an arena match, where it's kind of like you can do like let's say the difference between champions in League of Legends is sustained damage versus burst damage. So a champion like Ahri, which we see sometimes, can do a lot of burst damage, but the longer that team fight goes on, there are a lot of valleys where like if all of her cooldowns don't come back up, she's not doing a lot of damage. Then you have a champion like Tristana, who has, and a lot of AD carries, who have very high peaks in terms of burst damage, but when they're not using their abilities, they still have that high level of consistency because of their auto attacks doing so much damage. So it is like those kinds of graphs where you would see like a peak in damage because they use all their abilities, and it starts going down because they haven't used their abilities, and then it would keep spiking as those cooldowns come back up. So there's definitely a way to quantify it. It's definitely something that's worth doing. I'm very close to being able to do it through an Excel sheet, but I haven't done the entire thing because it's not easy to quantify damage, because you need to have a relative gold value to damage, because damage is only worth as much gold as you're removing from the enemy champion. So like,
yeah, and I started to try to pull numbers to do it, and I was just like, this is I don't know like 5% of what I need to know to even start.
We could do it. We could definitely do it. I'm 100%.
Oh, yeah, I believe you could do it.
I can't do it myself. I couldn't do it myself because I just hit certain things that I don't understand. But items are another thing. Like if we knew somebody who could like scrape off of the League of Legends API, then we would be able to get all the item information and then quantify that item. That item plus the stats of champions.
Yeah, and then they're trying to get it for every patch.
It's really easy. That's not the hard part. Like enter
it manually, like I was starting to do, it would take forever.
I have an item spreadsheet where it compares every single item to one another based on the relative gold value or the gold efficiency of the items. So like if you buy a longsword, it gives you 10 attack damage. That's worth 350 gold.
Yeah.
And you can apply that 35 gold per attack damage onto every item and onto every single champion, because champions have base statistics as well. We'll pick this conversation up when this video is finished. Yeah. But I think we both agree Damon's going to win. Next up, LCS. We have Team Liquid against TSM, and then they're playing against C9 in the finals. So I'll go first. I think that there is more value on the TSM side in this matchup. If you were betting it, I would rather be on the TSM side, because I think that their chances to win the series are much closer to 50% than the line implies. So they're at plus 160. I would say they're really probably plus 120, which I'm not getting a million percentage points, but I still like the TSM side. I will be actively rooting for TSM in this matchup. I do think that Team Liquid is the team that's more likely to win. And the way that TSM drafts is actually really problematic. And they are the kind of team that will throw away games that they should win. In their first matchup against Team Liquid, they threw away 2 games that they probably should have won. And that is kind of concerning, but like you can look at it both ways. They built up the lead, they should have been able to win, or it's like they had the lead, they couldn't win. Why is that? Like, is there some kind of fundamental issue with the team? But ultimately, I don't care who wins this match. Both will get stomped out by C9. So that would be probably the best thing possible for me, is Team Liquid barely squeaks by TSM and then gets completely demolished by Cloud9. And then I would just be able to laugh at everyone, because that's exactly how I said it was going to happen all year.
Um, so having watched a bunch of LCS, my sort of gut is that you're right. But as I alluded to earlier, the numbers just won't quit Team Liquid. So my model has them 69% nice
Nice.
over TSM. Egoat is 14% difference, which works out to maybe like a 60% win rate. So call that 65% on Team Liquid against TSM. Against C9, it's very close. Both metrics are in the low 50s, 52% for the model, and about 55% on the Egoat. But again, favors Team Liquid over Cloud9.
That's crazy. But that's
But
okay.
it also favored them over Cloud9 the last time they played, and we saw how that worked out.
But I mean, but it also probably picked over them during the regular season and won both of those matches too. So I mean, I just think I do think C9's better, and C9 is very similar to FPX in the sense that we're getting into a mid lane meta where the ability of a mid laner is going to be more important than it is in a lot of other metas. Just because like there are so many more games that are decided by the better mid laners scaling harder into the late game. But yeah, we agree. Well, I think C9 is going to win. You think Team Liquid's going to win.
I think
Feels
Cloud9's
bad.
my
Feels bad,
spread
man.
beats over here. I think the Team Liquid's going to win.
Yeah. And like I said, I do think Team Liquid will end up beating TSM. It's just I really hope that they lose. And then last but not least, we're in the LEC. G2 lost to Mad Lions, which was pretty interesting. And again, that's what I've been talking about with Mad Lions for all year. They are the type of team that fits that model of increased number of interactions, will fight you at everything, will have some like underwhelming performances against bad teams because they are willing to fight everyone. They just don't care. They will fight you because they assume they're better than you. And like I just love that kind of play style. So I always have a soft spot in my heart for teams like Mad Lions.
Do you think El Yoya is as good as the hype? And did you see that coming?
I knew that people would hype him up. I knew that Mad Lions would still be good. So I knew that like people would just give so much credit to him. Going from Arome to Armut is like having a junior varsity baseball player in high school to a Division 1 athlete in college.
What
Like
team was Armad on last year?
he was on a Turkish team. He was on one of the Turkish teams from Worlds. He had a pretty good Worlds performance, and then
Yeah.
like somebody picked him up. But people knew about Armut. I didn't know about Armut, but there were a lot of people who knew about him because like after Broken Blade and Closer came into the LCS, people were thinking to themselves like, who else from the Turkish league is good? And Armut was one of those players who was thought of highly, even before Worlds.
I
So
remember. Yeah, I remember the big games at Worlds. Him and Boss were the two guys I was expecting. But with El Yoya, but I loved. I watched a ton of EUM last year, so I loved Tinks and sort of was just shocked when by like the Tinks sort of middled, and while El Yoya is getting all the hype.
exactly.
Being a better team.
And I think if you look at the teams and how they play around their junglers and the actual impact that junglers are having, I think that Tinks definitely did have a better split than Mad Lions. It's just that when you have those increased number of interactions, you have more chances to have these highlight plays, and then people are just going to heap praise on you because you made this like gigantic play, or you have this gigantic kill score, or a huge KDA. That's why is because of those increased interactions. So stylistically, it's just skewed to make someone like El Yoya look better. I don't even think El Yoya is better than Shadow. I still think that Shadow was like unfairly kicked off the team, and his champion pool is going to eventually come back in style, and some team will probably pick him up and he'll look good again as long as his team doesn't suck. Because like I said, your teammate talent is like so important in League of Legends. So in the remaining semifinals matchup in the loser bracket, we have G2 against Rogue, and then the winner will play Mad Lions in the finals. So what does Egoat have to say about this matchup? The betting favorite is G2.
So it's interesting. We've got split sort of on all three games or in all potential matchups here. So G2 against Rogue. Egoat slightly favors G2 at about 52% win rate, whereas the model favors Rogue at about 55%, which I think comes back to sort of the Gen G point when you sort of get less goal dependent. A team like Rogue is a little bit more does a little bit better in the numbers. Mad against G2, if that is the final. The model gives G2 a 55% win rate, but Egoat gives Mad Lions a 62%. If it's Mad against Rogue, the model favors Rogue by more than it does G2 even, but Egoat favors Mad Lions by more than it does against G2. So it actually goes in opposite directions there, which is interesting.
That's weird. Uh, okay. I mean, I like G2. I think that G2 against Rogue, I still think G2 is the best team in Europe and probably the best team in the West altogether. I do have some issues with their itemization choices and the way they draft, which I mentioned in that other video I posted last week. Because like,
and apparently, right?
Yeah, teams. The thing is with teams, like they will get an idea in their head and then they'll just apply it recklessly, not pun not intended, and it's like they just they forget the reason why it's good, because like they were picking Moonstone Renewer plus Staff of Flowing Water with champions that don't necessarily take advantage of those buffs. So they were thinking to themselves, we want to play this like highly efficient materialistic style League of Legends, when in reality, like the buffs that we're giving to our teammates do not help our teammates as much as it would have helped other champions. So it's like you either need to adjust your draft or you need to adjust your build path, and they just weren't doing that. So I think G2 against Rogue, I've always been much higher on G2 than Rogue because of stylistic reasons. The one thing I will say about Rogue is that this year especially, they've been much more volatile, had much more interactions probably. Interactions would be a really cool thing to track. I don't know how to do that, but that would be really cool. And then honestly, I think whoever plays Mad Lions in the finals, I think that they will just beat Mad Lions. I do like Mad Lions. I just don't think they are as good as their performance these past two rounds would suggest. So it doesn't matter to me who comes out of this match. They'll probably end up being the betting favorites in the finals, and then I would still just expect them to win. So that's basically it.
I kind of like my feeling. I feel like G2 versus Rogue is a coin flip, and that Mad versus Rogue is, I don't know, like, yeah. I think I agree with you. I think that the G2 versus Rogue, I would say, is probably a coin flip, but I do think probably whoever wins this takes down Mad Lions.
If Rogue had their same style from last year, where they were more reserved, I think that Rogue would have a better chance to beat Mad Lions, but a worse chance to beat G2. Now that they have this new playstyle, they have a better chance to beat G2, and it increases the win chances for Mad Lions because there are more opportunities that weren't there before. Because in the G2 matchup, they will almost never be the aggressor. Like, they will almost always have somewhat reactive game scripts where they have to like show up to a couple team fights. Maybe G2 overplays their hand, goes for a tower dive, loses that tower dive, or something like that. Like that's how I would see that playing out for Rogue in their better in their chances to win series, like a series. When they're up against Mad Lions, I think that Rogue probably feels the pressure to be the aggressor and isn't as good at playing that role. So if they were more reserved, played more of a scaling play style, reducing the number of interactions, fighting around objectives more like Team Liquid would, then I think they'd have a better chance to win. Like
you just hope that Mad makes a mistake, or that you sort of, they try a tower dive and they fuck it up or screw it up. Sorry.
Doesn't matter. You can say fuck as much as you want on this channel. we're not getting in trouble.
But yeah, and then try to snowball a mistake into an objective and just sort of take it from there.
Yeah. So I think that's basically it. It was, as per usual, a very long video, but people who like watching my stuff understand what they're getting themselves into. They're gonna hear some very interesting, insightful stuff, but they're also gonna hear a lot of other stuff because the video is gonna go on for over an hour. But we should definitely talk more about the other League of Legends applications, because there's definitely something there. But to everybody who is still watching at this point, thanks for watching. You can take every single one of the bets that we made on this show and put like at least $100 on every single one of those bets. There's no way that we could possibly lose ever. This is not financial advice. But thank you, Billy, for joining us once again. It has been too long. Hopefully we can do this again pretty soon. Good luck the rest of the season.
You too, man. Would love to be back. We'll do it again.
Peace.